Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. The opening of today's Exodus story may simply read as a transition. It may seem on the surface to only represent the passage of time, but I believe it to be so much more. For the past 2 weeks, we have listened to the closing story of the book of Genesis. Joseph, favored son, was sold into slavery by the evil actions of his brothers. Surprisingly, the Joseph story counters the popular saying, when God closes a door, God opens a window. Joseph recognized that it was his brothers who had done the evil. God did cause it, closing the door on his former life. God does not cause bad things to happen. God, however, may indeed be one who opens windows, by which I mean that it is often God who shows and sends us on a way forward. God sent Joseph forth into slavery, where he found both a new life and connection to the old. The promise of God is not that bad things won't happen. What God promises is to be with us, even within the bad. And that is never the end of the story. Even in the midst of death and destruction, there's always new life. Joseph in Egypt ultimately becomes the trusted chief advisor to Pharaoh, and in a stroke of poetic justice, finds himself in a place of power and judgment over his brothers. He wrestles with what to do. He's still hurt and angry from the past. But ultimately, Joseph chooses to be reconciled to his brothers, realizing that even though they did evil to him, God set him forward with great purpose. Thanks to the trust and closeness of Joseph and the Pharaoh of his time, there was unity between the Israelites and the Egyptians, even in the midst of their differences. They lived for many years together in peaceful harmony, united for each other's benefits. But for some reason, the closeness ended. We do not know why. Perhaps the people stopped working closely with one another and stopped seeing benefits in each other's differences. But ultimately, over the span of 400 years, the stories of valuing each other were lost. And so that is when a new Pharaoh looked upon the Israelites as numerous and powerful people and started to fear them. They will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from this land. The new Pharaoh in this story is responsible for the change to hardship afflicted on the ancient Israelites. It is an all too familiar story of those with power getting fearful about losing it. And to preserve power, they turn people against one another, creating discord where there is none. But it is worth remembering that peace and unity must be constantly worked at by everyone. The generations had a responsibility to not forget the relationship formed between Joseph and Pharaoh, Israelite and Egyptian. Telling the story is thus the key requirement for human lives, and doing so is a matter of grave importance. Some stories, like in Genesis or Exodus or even Jesus' parables, do not rely at all on facts. Their stories may be set in history, but it's simply not important whether they happened or not. The point of the stories are what they mean, not that they happened this way. Some stories, however, are necessarily based on facts. You are likely familiar with the rather famous quote of Daniel Patrick Moynihan: "Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts." Facts, their use and misuse, are a primary point of contention in our modern world. On the Media's Brooke Gladstone makes this point in a Radio West interview titled "The Trouble with Reality." She said, "Facts, even a lot of facts, do not constitute reality. Reality is what forms after we filter, arrange, and prioritize those facts and marinate them in our values and traditions." You can't discuss both sides of an issue if you don't have the common pool of information. If your realities are so entirely separate, you have no basis on which to negotiate. In our Genesis story this morning, the new Pharaoh weaves a story of mistrust and alarm. They will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. He builds on people's deepest fears to usher in an era of despair and oppression. If people had truly known and remembered their history, as shared earlier in the story, such results would not have been possible. This is, of course, the place where we find ourselves now. Alternate narratives have been woven about what our society is based on, what it should look like, and how it should be shaped now for the future. Our lack of knowing our history and the inability to share a common story has brought us to a great crossroads. We must work hard now to reveal the agendaed, selective reading of the past. It is our responsibility to know our history, our story, including the uncomfortable parts and the abusive ones as well, the parts we're ashamed of. Doing so allows us to embrace the good and commendable while lamenting and rejecting the wrongs and the affliction of suffering. We are at the critical point of transformation. We can become people hoped for that walk and work hand in hand, celebrating the diversity and connectedness found in this world. Or we can further the breach between peoples and stubbornly march blindly towards the plagues to come.